Well, this time last year, that was my opening slide. Russia's steady move south. But we weren't talking about going into Syria. We were talking about going into Crimea. In March of the previous year, 2014, he had annexed Crimea. And who would have anticipated the speed and the depth of the movement that Putin has made since that step into Crimea? This time last year, we could never have imagined the situation as we see it today. And we see not only Russia now on the borders of Israel, we see Britain being prepared to leave the EU, we see Israel making stronger alliances with the Gulf states. There are many signs for Zion's watchmen, and how thrilled my father would be to see how far we have come in the 21 years or so since he fell asleep. So we want to take some broad sweeps. As I say, last year we're looking at the bear's footprints going into Crimea, and we have witnessed a much deeper movement of the bear. He is now well established in Syria. And so as we look at these things, he has embedded himself. He's taken the opportunity that Obama seems to be not interested in the Middle East. He expresses interest in the Far East. He has seen his window of opportunity, and he has seized it. And it is with great spectacular speed that he is moved into that region. To the north lies Moscow, to the north of Israel, and we've been waiting for the northern power to come down with great power into the Middle East. And we believe that what we have seen in the past year is the first of the many steps that have got to be taken before the northern hordes come down upon the nation of Israel. But the speed at which it has happened, I think, has taken us all by surprise. And we have to imagine, brothers and sisters, young people, the angels working so hard behind the scenes to ensure that there was a Putin prepared for this task many, many years before. All the training and his outlook and what happened to him, his relationship with the Jews, and that all shaped this character, this man. And so the angels have worked on a timescale which is out of our understanding. But they have put a man there who has great ambitions. His ambition is to glorify Russia, to make it a nation, an empire again. And we're seeing those steps. And at the same time, he has his eyes upon the destination of two cities, as we shall see in a moment, Constantinople and Jerusalem. But God has said, plans of men will fail. And in spite of the unrighteousness of the nation of Israel at this time, God's plan and purpose will not deviate. And we were just reading, just about a week ago, in the Psalms, Psalm 89, written by Ethan, who we know from 1 Kings chapter 4, was the wisest of all men, bar Solomon. And through this man, God made this revelation. My covenant will I not break, neither alter the thing that is gone out of my lips. Once have I sworn in my holiness that I will not lie unto David. His seed shall endure forever, and his throne as the sun before me. It shall be established forever as the moon, and as a faithful witness in heaven. Selah. So he had witnessed, he was contemporary with Solomon, obviously, and he probably lived to see the decline of Solomon's empire. But he knew that the day was going to come when there would be a Messiah upon the throne of David. And the promises which God made to the fathers of old and to King David would reach their fulfillment in the coming of the one who should bring peace to the world and rule in righteousness to the ends of the earth. And even if Israel was unfaithful, God knows that in the ultimate, in the terrible destruction that we looked at earlier, looking at Jerusalem, the terrible destruction that's going to come upon Jerusalem, that there will be the remnant who, seeing all that happens to them, will cry out to their God for help and indeed be helped and saved. And so it will be seen that God was right to choose the Jews. So Vladimir, Prince Putin, as I say, God uses the characteristics of men as he did in Pharaoh and other Nebuchadnezzar. He uses these characteristics to forward his purpose. And it's so fascinating to see how this cold, calculating man is the right man for this job of bringing the nations against his people. And what is so interesting is to see the importance of religion in the motivations of Putin. The coming clash is to be a clash of religion. And in Putin's life, the Russian Orthodox Church plays a very important place. And the other is his most unexpected friendship with the Jews, which we will look at a moment, as has been hinted at earlier today. So, unlike the West, where church and state are kept poles apart, in Russia the psyche is that church and state should work together. That's how it was in the time of the Tsars. That all broke up, obviously, under the communist system. But under Putin especially, the church has flourished, and this partnership between church and state working together has come to the fore. And Putin seeks to recreate that role. He is very close to Patriarch Kirill. As this quote says, separation of church and state is a concept which was born in America in the 18th century and later spread to Europe in the 20th century. It is one of the most important founding principles of the American political system. Contemporary Russia profoundly disagrees with the West on this point, seeing great advantages in the union of church and state, which is the same as saying there are profound problems with the separation of church and state. It is one of the fundamental philosophical differences between Russia and the West. And if we're to enter into the mind of Putin and the Russians, then we have to see this linkage between state and religion. We've seen the revival of the Roman Catholic Church in recent times. And as I say, what we have to remember is this coming clash in the land of Israel is a challenge over the right of Israel to be there and the authority of Israel's God compared with the God of the churches. And as Jonathan said, the challenge is upon the legitimacy of Israel to be in their land. So the nations are going to invade Israel as a challenge to the God of Israel. Does Israel have a right to be there? Well, if the God of Israel is the true and living God, yes, they have. If the Trinitarian God of Christendom is the true God, then Israel, no, it hasn't a right to be there. So it's a coming contest. The church saying we are the legitimate successors to the promises. Israel is saying, no, this is our land. We can trace our history back over 3 millennia. And we're witnessing the great hostility of the nations. And there's a great movement, not only in this country, but around the world, to boycott Israel, to boycott and divest and impose sanctions. We saw earlier the many United Nations efforts to delegitimize Israel. So, what is going to happen? There is an element of spoil and prey that Ezekiel 38 talks about, that God comes down to take a spoil and a prey. But other prophets make it clear that this is a holy war. And that is going to be God's challenge to the nations. That Israel's God is the true and living God. These are my people. This is my land. And that's what the nations will be judged upon, whether they are prepared to accept Israel's God or reject him. We know how Europe, because of the background that they have, will fight to the end, and Europe will be a lake of fire in the coming judgments after the Battle of Armageddon. And Joel makes it clear that this invasion of Israel, which might not be led by Putin at that time, but it is to be Russian-led, coming down into the land, He says at that time in Joel chapter 3, "Behold, in those days and in that time, when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem," meaning the restoration of Judah and Jerusalem. But why do they need restoring? Because, as he goes on to say, they have been scattered. And he says how he will draw all nations and bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will plead with them there. What for? For my people, my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among their nations and parted my land. So how interesting that in spite of the unrighteousness of Israel today, God says of this coming time, they are my people, this is my land, I have sworn to their fathers, I will fulfill what is written. And so we know how that chapter ends, that Yahweh will roar out of Zion and utter his voice from Jerusalem. The heavens and the earth, the political heavens and earth shall shake, but Yahweh will be the hope of his people and the strength of the children of Israel. And so in that day, when they look upon him whom they have pierced and mourn and repent and turn wholeheartedly, and chapter 13 verse 1, they will be baptized into the waters that flow out from Jerusalem, caused by the massive earthquakes of that time. They will be in the same position, baptized into Christ, walking in faith, serving their Messiah who has come. And as far as the nations are concerned, and Israel is concerned, so shall ye know that I am Yahweh your God, dwelling in Zion, my holy mountain. Then shall Jerusalem be holy, and there shall no strangers pass through her any more. So we can see that that is a religious contest. It is a battle about the God of Israel, whether he is the true and living God or not. And so, and Scripture points us to this fact, we should expect there to be a strengthening of religions in these last days. Religion, 100 years ago, began to fade, but now it is beginning to revive again. And we witnessed just a couple of weeks ago this astonishing coming together of those two branches, the Roman Catholic and the Russian Orthodox, their leaders, separated since 1065, is it? When was it? 1066, was it? No, 1055. Get it right. Thanks. 1,000 years ago, they split, and the leaders have never met. Now they did meet 2 weeks ago. Francis meets with the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, Patriarch Kirill, in Havana on February the 12th. The meeting is the first of its kind since an 11th century schism split Christianity into Western and Eastern branches. But I'm not going into any detail because we looked at this, I think it was last year. The Babylonian tree, the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, was to be cut down, but it was to be banded. And interestingly, I've always thought of it as two bands, an iron band and a brass band, but that's not what the record says. It says it had a band made up of two metals, iron and brass. And iron and brass, we see Rome and Greece, Roman Catholic and the Orthodox churches, they have preserved Babylon down through the centuries. Why has it been banded to preserve it? Because it has to flourish again. And that's what we're seeing today. With the overflow of communism, the flourishing of the Russian Orthodox churches, and now in Europe there is a greater movement to bring religion back into the centre of Europe's life. It is so empty that they realise that they need religion, and the Pope is very willing to provide that spiritual welfare to Europe. We're seeing a revival of the Babylonian tree for a short time to be cut down by the Lord Jesus Christ. And so the Nebuchadnezzar's image has its golden head. It will be led by Babylon the Great, primarily with Russian power, but with eyes and mouth representing the two churches, the Russian and the Greek and the Roman Catholic churches, brought together to direct, to speak, to challenge Israel. That's why the image stands up, to come against the land of Israel, to be broken in that land, to be replaced by the little stone power. So, interestingly, Putin is put in a very strong position because he has the backing of the Russian Orthodox leader and he has the backing of the Pope in his work in Syria, in saving the persecuted Christians. Russia is very cognizant that many of its Orthodox believers have suffered terrible persecutions, as have Roman Catholic ones in Syria. And the West seems to do little about it. And here Putin has come along to save the persecuted Christians, as well as to plant his feet there, as well as to see if they can get rid of ISIS. But the persecuting of Christians is something which has given him the support of the West in the work that he is doing. So we go back to that meeting of 2 weeks ago. This is one of the key things that they were discussing. Francis and Kirill also called for political leaders to act on the single most important issue of shared concern between the Catholic and Orthodox churches today, the plight of Christians in Iraq and Syria who are being killed and driven from their homes by the Islamic State group. Now, you can see that if behind Putin's mind his justification for going into Syria is to save the Christians who are being persecuted there, if we just project our minds forward a little bit, with the return of the Master, the judgment having taken place, the Elijah work taking place and Reformation in Israel, that there could easily arise among the zealous Jews that are there a persecution of not only Christians but also Muslims, because the idolatry of the Christian churches lies very uneasy with the Jewish faith. And we can see a situation which would very easily unite the world together to come against Israel if churches and mosques are being shut under a Jewish revival led by Elijah the prophet. We can't be sure, but it is so interesting that these things are happening just at this time. So Putin has met the Pope on 3 occasions. That was before, 2 occasions. And again, this is a little quote from USA Today. To have the Roman Pope with his internationally recognised authority, not as a critic, but as an ally, or at least simply as a neutral silent figure, is highly attractive to Putin and his associates. The Moscow Patriarch has always been an instrument of Russian international policy. Today, the Moscow Patriarch, with its established international ties, remains an effective transmitter worldwide of the political interests of the Russian rulers. So, from what they're saying, we can see the great advantage to Putin of having this backing of the Pope, as well as his own patriarch. So, this is how Russia looks out upon the Middle East. Most maps we look upwards at Russia, but Russia looks downwards at the warm waters of the Mediterranean and the abundance of energy that is down there. Much easier life without being snowbound for 6 months of a year. And he has his eyes on taking that part of the world and having control over it. And he is set upon, as I said earlier, 2 cities, Constantinople and Jerusalem. Constantinople, because that is where the Russian Orthodox Church sprang from over 1,000 years ago. And when it fell to the Ottoman power, that was esteemed a great disaster in the eyes of the Russian people, and they have longed to overcome that. And you've seen this picture, and I thank Brother John Ramsden for drawing my attention to it many, many years ago, that when Brother John went, he asked them what the cross over the crescent meant, and they told him, well, we're looking for the time when Christianity will triumph over the Muslim power. And this is a very real ideal in their minds. They do not like what Turkey now is changing to a Muslim state. And of course, Jerusalem, because that is where Christianity started. But we can also see, from Russia's viewpoint, what an advantage having Crimea is. Because it's well down and well on the way to the warm waters of the Middle East. And Russia, Putin, has spent a lot of money in investing in building up the defences on Crimea and making it a forward base. There are now 5 military bases which have been rebuilt and re-equipped, and the latest equipment is being stocked there, ready for the move forward. And now, time has gone on, and a lot of the equipment that we saw go into Syria came from this forward base in Crimea. Highly advanced, the technology that he has invested in there. So let's have a look at the bear on its prow. It now moved well forward from Crimea into Syria. Russia's intentions are quite clear. They want to establish themselves there. They want to consolidate. And this is what we have been seeing since September, when with dramatic speed he moved down into Syria. But he's been taking other steps to consolidate his power. I can't access the screen there, but by the bear's ear, you can just see a little bit of a footprint behind this lower ear, and then another one against it. There are 2 Russian bases there, which he is now rebuilding to strengthen the Russian presence on the northern border of Ukraine. And as we shall see, he has moved into Armenia, as well as going into Syria. So we witnessed at the end of September, absolutely startling speed, the movement of men, troops, aircraft, ships from many places, some coming down from the Black Sea through the Dardanelles into the Mediterranean and to Tartus, the port at Syria. Others came by air down the Caspian Sea and across Iran and Iraq. Other boats came by sea all the way around. There was this tremendous focus of armaments into Syria. And the groundwork had been done. Russian troops and advisors had prepared the ground, worked out where they were going to put their bases, made preparations for it. It went very swiftly. And it delivered a shock to the West that Russia had all this equipment and such sophisticated equipment. So war in Syria, Russia's rust bucket military, delivers a high-tech shock to Western Israel. As the Kremlin showcases its military capabilities in Syria, I'm not going to pronounce his name, NATO leaders are having to reassess their army's equipment and strategy was outmoded. Their air forces' bombs and missiles were more dumb than smart. Their navy was more rust than ready. For decades, this was the Western military leaders' view, steeped in condescension of their Russian counterparts. What they have seen in Syria and Ukraine has come as a shock. Russian military jets have at times been carrying out more sorties in a day in Syria than the US coalition had done in a month. The Russian Navy has launched ballistic missiles from the Caspian Sea 900 miles away and kept supply lines going to Syria. The air defences installed by the Russians in Syria and eastern Ukraine would make it extremely hazardous for the West to carry out strikes against the Assad regime or Ukrainian separatists. Hodges, the commander of the US Army in Europe, has described the Russian advances in electronic warfare in Syria and Ukraine, a field in which they were typically supposed to be backward, as eye-watering. Mr. Putin has relished pointing out the significance of the West, seeing for the first time that these weapons do exist, that they are of high quality, and that we have well-trained people who can put them to effective use. They have now seen too that Russia is ready to use them if this is in the interests of our country and our people. And it's abundantly clear that Russia is there for the long term. The type of equipment that has been put in indicates that is not intending to move out soon. And the weaponry, is very sophisticated. We witnessed the missiles being launched from the Caspian, going 900 miles, these formidable weapons, zigzagging their routes across Iran into their targets. It's opened a new field, isn't it, in warfare, that you could position from a small boat in the Caspian and send a cruise missile all that distance. As far as the West was concerned, cruise missiles had to come from big ships, not from little ships. Russia has got the technology to be able to do it from small ships. And Putin has installed on the outskirts of Moscow the most modern control centre from which all Russian troops around the world, all their activities are beamed into this state-of-the-art. America's got nothing that will touch this observation point with all its huge monitors. And they can sit in Moscow and see what's going on in Ukraine, in Syria, around the world, wherever the Russian troops are. And, all their desks for the different branches of the Russian military to watch what is going on. You see, Putin means business. He's warned the West, push me too far and I will react. And the West thought, well, he hasn't got the ability to do it. So he has showcased his ability to use his weapons to gain what he wants. And this is from the BBC just a month ago. Syrian conflict, Russia's build-up looks long-term. It's now 4 months since Russia launched its military intervention in Syria with airstrikes and a build-up of troops on the ground. BBC's Steve Rosenberg has been embedded with Russian troops and has sent this diary of his 4-day visit. When Moscow launched its air campaign in Syria, it made it clear that this would be a temporary operation, which, of course, that's what Putin always says. It's just a temporary operation, but obviously things change. But nearly 4 months on, there is no sign of Russia winding down offensive operations. My overwhelming impression from these last 4 days is that Russia's military operation in Syria and its military presence are looking increasingly long-term. Vladimir Putin promised the Russian operation in Syria would be limited in time, but right now there is no end in sight. Because we know, Bible in hand, this is an important stepping stone towards Jerusalem and towards Constantinople. And a great concern to the West is the air defence surface-to-air missile complex, the S-400 and the S-500, which is just coming along, which he has stationed in Syria, which has paralysed the West's action in Syria because they have to now get Russian approval to send planes. And the S-400, its radar can reach 600 kilometres, which encompasses nearly all of Israel, and their missiles can reach northern Israel. And in a fascinating way, this is what Scripture told us. We've read it many times in Ezekiel chapter 38, that he would be a guard unto his people. And be the next slide. But every 2 years, Israel and America get together and have Operation Juniper Cobra. So this year, because it's 2016, Juniper Cobra 16, where the two air forces get together and have great exercises for several weeks. This year it's been absolutely stymied because of the radar and the spy planes which Russia now has. Russia and Israel don't want to reveal the secrets of what they can and cannot do. And so they're having to transfer all what they would have normally done in the area over to America so they don't get seen. So this coming into Syria has had a great effect. But as I say, it is a coverage, and of course this isn't the only place where he's putting in the S-400. It's going in Crimea and in Armenia. And it means that the Western nations, NATO especially, feels very vulnerable because these will attack any plane that goes over. But as I say, we know from Ezekiel 38 and verse 7 that Gog was to be a guard unto the companion nations that came under her wing. Now, we've seen that in supplying equipment and looking after their needs. And so this is just another layer, and this is, the wonderful way that God works. That here is yet another layer. Russia is putting this guard, as it were, over these nations so the West can't intervene. And this very advanced spy plane just hovers above Syria, picks up all the Israeli signals, and Israel does feel very vulnerable. And yet, at the same time, we have this remarkable situation that there is great cooperation at the moment between Netanyahu, President of Israel, and President Putin. And we'll elaborate on that in just a moment. But I just want to take one thing which came up in the Debka yesterday. This is the situation at the moment. We know Russia nominally went in to defeat ISIS. Really, it was to defend Assad and support Assad. And though Russia has been sending its planes against ISIS, the vast majority of the sorties have been against the rebels, as they are termed, who are opposed to Assad. So Russia is there primarily to help the Syrians. And the main battle at the moment is round Aleppo and going northward there, in this corridor between what ISIS controls and what the Kurds, who are hated by the Turks, they have a strip of land which is their influence there, and Russia is very happy to work with the Kurds. And at the moment there is massive bombing in this region in order to take this under Kurdish, Russian, Syrian control and out of ISIS control. And Turkey is very much being pushed out of the way. And the southern Arab states are being pushed out of the way. It very much is a working of Russia and America, although America is playing a much smaller role than the Russian role. And we have this incredible situation that 18 months ago, Putin was being treated by the West as a pariah because he'd moved into Crimea, and people didn't want to speak to him. At the conference in Melbourne, I think it was, in Australia, he went home early in a huff because nobody wanted to talk to him. Now he's regarded as the saviour, the one who has stepped in to help the situation, to defeat ISIS, this terrible scourge of ISIS. So, what a great about turn there has been in a very short time. As I say, the support that he's got from the Pope and the Patriarch helps with that. But what was so interesting, as I say, I haven't sent it out, and I do apologise, I'm so behind with the snippets. But there is this tongue of land coming down on the far side there, which Turkey took from Syria 85 years ago. And Syria has said, this is ours, and Turkey says, no, we've taken this is ours. It is a source of conflict. And what Putin is threatening to do as punishment, further punishment to Turkey, is to take that tongue of land and restore it to Syria. Now, the importance of that is that in there, and I should have ringed it, but it was early hours this morning when this went in, that you will see Atakia. Now, I just hope you can see Atakia on there. But that is the ancient Antioch. This was, in the days of the Seleucids, this was the capital for this region. They had two capitals, one in Babylon to look after the Eastern Empire, this to look after the Western Empire. So what Putin is threatening to do is to retake this area, ancient Antioch, and have it under his control, because he's going to stop there. Whoever succeeds Assad, Putin's influence is going to be there. And so this was the seat of the original King of the North, as it was in the first time round, as it were. Eventually, he's got to take Constantinople, but this is an intermediate stepping stone. So that was fascinating. This is a real threat to Turkey at the moment. It says, I'm going to retake that, because that really is Syrian territory, you shouldn't have it. So, again, what a change in the relationship between Turkey and Russia. Now, last year we were talking about the cooperation. Russia had decided, about September time, wasn't until last year, that he was not going to take the gas pipeline into Bulgaria and onto Europe. Instead, he would divert it into the western Turkey and call it Turkish Stream, and they had these agreements that this Russian gas would come to Turkey right up to the borders. And then Turkey and Greece, if they wanted to extend the pipeline, could then sell the gas onwards into Europe. But that's now all gone by the board. We can say it was shot out of the sky, wasn't it, when the Turks shot down that Russian military plane, which they claimed had strayed into its territory. And this gave Putin the excuse that he was being looking for. He wants to take Turkey eventually. And we know from scriptures that that is to be the case. As Brother Thomas put it 140, 50 years ago. As to the Ottoman, his existence in Constantinople is exceptional. The existence of the Ottoman regime in the Kingdom of Babylon must be regarded by way of illustration as a splint upon a broken leg. It remains, therefore, the support of the limb until the fractured ends have been reunited by the callus, after which the splint is removed as useless. The time is now about to come when the Ottoman splint may be removed and the Latino-Greek leg of the image repaired by the Russian callus be permitted to stand under a regime more in consonance with the Catholic constitution of the Kingdom of Babylon. When the autocrat Russia gains Constantinople, Russianizes Italy and the West, and having superseded the Ottoman regime in Asia, comes as go to invade the Holy Land and to besiege Jerusalem, the little horn of the goat will again represent the power of the whole dominion, briefly united under one chief, and he the proudest that ever exalted and magnified himself above all the rulers upon the earth. Well, it's taken a long, long time for those words to be fulfilled, and they still haven't yet been fulfilled, but we can see the movement towards it. Turkey is being surrounded. And to the east of Turkey is Armenia. Just get rid of the bear. Well, he's a dragon bear. Yeah. Get rid of the bear. We can see little Armenia there, which again is a source of great conflict to the Turks. And this is where he has chosen to make a defence treaty and to build up arms to the east of Turkey. So this is from the Washington Times a couple of days ago. Putin, I couldn't help but catch this headline. Putin encircles Turkey in massive troop build-up. And it's rather a long quote, but bear with me. Obama administration remains silent. Russian President Vladimir Putin's plans in the Middle East are becoming clearer. In a bid to exact vengeance on Turkey and in an attempt to split the NATO alliance, Russia is rapidly building up pressure on NATO's southern flank. The new Russian satellite state of Armenia, on Turkey's northeastern border, is now hosting a massive Russian troop build-up with the recent signing of air defence agreements between Russia and Kremlin, along with the building up of President... along with the building up of... Anyway, I must have knocked a slide out or something. Never mind. Anyway, Putin had been quite brutal to the Turkish ambassador to tell your dictator president he can go to hell along with his ISIS terrorists and I shall make Syria to be nothing but a big Stalingrad. So that's his threat to Turkey. We've seen pictures of Grozny and the other places. So this is a great threat. Histrionics aside, the intention is clear. Russia views Turkey as a hostile state and it will not back down. Turkey has played into Putin's hands by turning a blind eye to ISIS fighters infiltrating into Syria to fight against Turkey's enemy, Assad, and by shooting down a Russian fighter jet. Erdogan's penchant for oppression and his obvious desire to build another Islamic state is disturbing. However, this does not mean NATO, and especially the United States, can ignore Russia's aggressive expansion and threatening behaviour. Obama's been outmanoeuvred by Putin in the Middle East and obviously doesn't care. And this is an American paper writing this. Whether Obama has a diabolic agenda or just incompetent will now have to be sifted through and settled by historians. However, the next American president will have a big job to stand up to Putin's obvious dreams of an empire. So it is clear that this move into Turkey, into Armenia, into Crimea is all an encircling of Turkey in preparation to take it. The writing is on the wall for Turkey, and Scripture has made it clear that that is Turkey's destiny, to be occupied by Russia as the latter-day King of the North. Now, the other side of Turkey is Greece. And it is teetering on the brink of collapse, not only because of the euro crisis, but because of the migrant crisis. And the EU now is busy building up walls to prevent migrants going into Bulgaria and onwards to Romania. And they're getting trapped in Greece. And Greece is not going to be able to cope with it. I think we could well, in quite a short time, see the collapse of Greece. And Russia, of course, is just waiting in the wings. Russia has made great friendships with the Greek people. He has lent them money. He has promised he will help them. And so when the situation comes, he'll be ready there to take Greece and perhaps not to put massive troops in there. We do not know what is going to happen, but we can be quite sure that at the back of Putin's mind, well, I've got to the north, I'm now in the south, I'm now in the east, I just need Turkey, just need Greece, and then Turkey is encircled. So let's just turn to Israel, and this has been mentioned by Brother Stephen, this most remarkable friendship, his surprising Jewish connection revealed. In the long history of Jews in Russia, the government has rarely been an ally and often been the source of persecution. Current President Vladimir Putin, however, is a powerful exception, and Jews playing a significant role in his personal history and his inner circle. With the Russian army a major playing in the potentially explosive multinational puzzle unfolding in Syria, this personal element could become an important and perhaps decisive factor in how the conflict unfolds. Putin is a powerful player in the explosive situation in the Middle East. There are clearly political and military considerations that cause him to look upon Israel as an ally. But it might be the personal connection he has with Jews that has led him to be the most pro-Israel Russian leader in the world has seen in a long time, and has just passed a law against using the Bible to persecute the Jews. I'm not going to explain that, but The reason why he is so friendly with the Jews is when he was a child, both his parents were poor and went out to work, and they had Jewish neighbours. And these Jewish neighbours used to take in young Putin, who was an only child, and look after him and feed him and cared for him, which was quite a dangerous thing to do at that time, because obviously that was in the Soviet days. But that friendship with the Jews showed to him has remained with Putin. And several actions he has taken has shown that. Remember again that 1 in 6, 1 in 7 of the Israelis are Russian-speaking. There are very strong ties. And here we have a leader for the first time of the Russians who is friendly to Israel. And at the moment there is great cooperation between Netanyahu and Putin because Israel needs to attack the Hezbollah and the arms that are coming to her, which have ultimately been supplied by Russia, and Putin is prepared to stand back and allow this to happen. So we have quite a remarkable situation at this time. And what he wants to do is to help Israel develop the gas fields, the Leviathan gas fields, and they now found another huge one, as big as Tamar. He wants a foot in the door in helping to develop those. And as he said to Netanyahu, look, I'm the only person that can prevent the terrorists, the Hezbollah, Hamas, and those, from attacking your gas fields. Work with me, and I'll make sure all is well. Well, there is quite a movement in Israel to go along with that. The West obviously is horrified at the idea of Israel working with Russia. But it makes sense. Russia has the money and the technology to be able to develop them. And there is this friendship between them. And so these huge fields which need developing because they have been discovered, but a lot of work has to go on before the gas can come to land. It's a very expensive job. It's very deep water there. And as well as gas on the sea, it's so interesting that just last month or two, they have discovered on the Golan Heights vast quantities of oil, which is said to will be able to supply Israel's oil needs for years and years to come. So suddenly, you know, Israel is a very prized object to somebody who wants to have energy under his belt, as Putin does. And back in July, there was an advert in this Eurasia Oil and Gas magazine, which is published in Russia. And the Russians were sending a delegation to a conference that was being held about the development of the Leviathan fields. And there was an advertorial that went with it. On the front page, heads up Russia, Israel is an oil and gas play worth considering. And the article says to the Russian people, make with pipes and drilling and all the rest of it, all the different branches, no, come along to this conference. Israel wants help to develop. This is an opportunity for you. And that phrase, heads up, is an interesting one. Be prepared, take note, and that's exactly what Joel has to say. And sadly, we are seeing in Israel exactly the same situation that we read of in the time of the kings. Israel making alliances with the nations around her, rather than depending on ploughing their own course and trusting in God. And it is abundantly clear from Scripture that prior to the invasion of Israel, Israel is going to be working with Gog, the Russian power. Israel is a small country. Russia and the new Eurasian Confederation, which is her equivalent of the EU, is a very attractive market to Israel. It has a huge population when you've only got 6 million and a very high GDP, $4 trillion. And the Israelis are very keen to become a member of this Eurasia, and have these links with Russia. Because the EU is increasingly hostile. It is the EU that is pushing these boycotts, the labelling of the goods made on the West Bank. And so very attractive to Israel to orientate towards Russia. Well, we know that when Russia comes down, we know the words well, that it is Russia thinking an evil thought, which gives us a hint that, well, this is a bit of a stab in the back, isn't it? If she thinks an evil thought. It gives an indication that before this time, she has been working with Israel, been a friend to Israel, and then suddenly turns her back and thinks this evil thought. Well, that's reinforced by Isaiah chapter 10. In fact, it's made crystal clear that this is the situation. Israel and Russia will be working together. In that day, and it's talking about the time when Israel are restored back in faith and trust, in that day, those that have escaped the terrible judgments which are to come, they shall no more stay, lean upon, support oneself, upon him that smote them, but shall stay upon Yahweh, the Holy One of Israel. So that's crystal clear, isn't it? That prior to their change in heart, they will be trusting in the one that smites them. The one that smites them is Gog, is Russia, Putin. And this is exactly what we're seeing with our own eyes, this cooperation between Israel and Russia, which will prove to be a disaster for Israel, because they're not trusting in their God. At the same time as we have this interesting cooperation, we also have Israel working with the southern Arab states. I'm not going to say much about this because we've talked about it many times before, but this was just an interesting article way back in October, since the whole world away, didn't it, October. The Arabs were, this is about all the troubles that are still going on in Jerusalem, the Intifada. The Arab world's silence during this recent wave of terrorism, led mostly by knife-wielding Palestinian teenagers, is deafening. And it represents a certain lack of support for Palestinians. The Arab nations seem willing to leave these radical elements to deal with the mess they have caused by themselves. This time, the wave of terrorism not only fails to represent the Arab struggle against Israel, it fails to represent even the Palestinians themselves. In other words, it's saying, as far as the other Arab nations are concerned, the Palestinians are just a bit of a sideline, a bit of a nuisance. The more important battle is the battle against Iran. Israel is the one who, alone of the nations there, can help defend them against Iran and what Iran is doing. So there's a clear change of mood. And we read by way of introduction from Isaiah chapter 2. And we know the opening verses, we quote them many times when we're giving lectures, that wonderful picture of the coming kingdom and the great change that will be in Isaiah's time, and the nations coming up to Jerusalem and recognising the God of Israel as the true God and wanting to listen to the words of God. And as is so typical of the prophets, that's the end picture. That is what is going to happen. But how do we get there? And that's what the rest of the chapter tells us. And so, the mood abruptly changes, didn't it, at the end of verse 4, having described, or verse 5, O house of Jacob, come ye and walk in the light of the Lord. Then verse 6 has this situation of God's people, obviously just immediately prior to this time. So in these verses from 6 to 9, we have a description of how God knew 2,500 millennia ago what Israel's state of mind would be. And how does God describe Israel? Thou hast forsaken thy people, the house of Jacob, Why? He's going to let their enemies defeat them in order that they might learn their lesson. Why? Because they are replenished from the east. So that means they have trading agreements. That's the idea behind it with the east. Now, to the east of Israel are the Arab states. Further east is India. Further east still is Japan and China. And Israel is reaching out to all those countries, almost turning her back on Europe, but not Britain, and seeking to build new markets with the Chinese, the Japanese, with the Indians. So she is being replenished from the east. She is seeking to build her wealth by trading with those in the east. Now, soothsayers like the Philistines were known apparently to want to know what was going to happen. They were interested in what the future held. And we know that Israel is very much concerned with what is going to happen. Their intelligence network is second to none. If somebody's got a better explanation, please let me know. They please themselves in the children of strangers. And again, in the original there, the idea is shaking hands, making alliance with people who are not Jews. Jews have traditionally traded with Jews and then on to Gentiles, but increasingly Israel is making alliances, signing up to the Russians, signing up to the Chinese, all these alliances with non-Jews, with strangers, shaking hands with them, building up this trade. The land is full of silver and gold. Interestingly, that's the language of electronics, which Israel is the world leader, isn't it? But yes, they are comparatively rich and prosperous compared with the other nations. No end of their treasures. The land is full of horses and chariots. We would say today tanks, Iron Dome, David's sling, all the rest of it. Their land is full of idols. What are idols? Idols are substitutes for God. What is Israel's substitute for God? It is the weaponry that their own fingers have made. They have designed these things, they have made them, they are using them. And they're putting their trust in them. So that when Gallup, whoever it is, does a poll of what nations feel safe and secure, an ideal country to live in, Israel's fairly near the top, whereas we know what's going to happen. And you would think, well, surrounded by all those millions who are trying to drive them into the sea, but they're very confident. These are their idols they have trusted in. And rich and poor, mean and great man, bow down to these idols that they have made. Therefore, forgive them not. They will only be forgiven when they recognise the futility of all these alliances, all these defences. When in that day, when the mighty earthquake comes and they have been invaded and all hope seems to be lost, when they cry out for their God. No, the earthquake won't have taken place for them. But when they have been invaded and taken prisoners and many of them die, then when they do cry out to their God, then with majestic power, Christ and the saints who have been prepared will come up to save his people. Now, time is nearly gone, so just very briefly, a look at Britain. I thought that was quite appropriate. I don't know whether you can read the writing on. I'm sorry for the small screen. Cameron is saying, have you put on weight? I was going to ask you the same. The drag that the EU has on British trade. And there is a growing feeling that time has now come to part with Europe. Cameron's tried his best to obtain a deal, but he hasn't got much of one. And we're now told that, well, many of the elements are still waiting to be worked out. So, it is no deal at all. And a considerable number of his own cabinets see the desire to leave. But that isn't the leap into the unknown. The leap into the unknown is to remain in a Europe which looks as if it's about to collapse any moment with the Euro crisis, with the migrant crisis. The whole thing is out of kilter. And to remain with the uncertainties that will give is greater than having a fresh start. Well, it's all in the hands of God and the angels. But But we will be most surprised if on June the 23rd, if the referendum is indeed held then, that the British people don't indicate that they want to leave. And the angels can work subtle changes which will swing the pendulum. There is a growing movement towards a Brexit. And interestingly, France and Germany are working on a fallback position. The Schengen area, which has all this free trade, which has caused all the problems, fine when the EU was booming and that, but now it is in great difficulty, and then all these migrants can, once they've got in, can travel anywhere. What they're planning to do is to have their own mini-one, which is more or less the territory of the old Holy Roman Empire. And we may well see a much shrunk down Europe as Russia takes over Greece and Italy and areas around there. We wait and see. So we're seeing the beast power, great changes there. We're seeing the false prophet rising in power. We're seeing the dragon roaring and moving its way around the Middle East. Iran and Iraq and Syria and Russia having their influence across there. As America increasingly withdraws from the Middle East, we're seeing Britain being drawn more and more into the Middle East, and if Britain does leave the EU, that will be the natural market to develop. So we're seeing these wonderful things that we've talked about and anticipated come to place before our eyes. And we just long and pray for that day to come when the Lord will be here, and eventually peace and blessing and stability will fill this earth, and there will be a new heavens and a new earth. And we pray that in God's mercy we may be part of that new heavens and that new earth. We don't know how long we have. The Master can come at any time, or we can fall asleep, and our next waking breath will be the call to the Master, the resurrection. He is at the door, brothers and sisters.